Welcome, everybody. Sean O'Connell here, stateside, joining me from all the way across the pond, the legend, the outlaw, Dan Hardy. Lots to talk about in the sport of mixed martial arts. Got some UFC news, some PFL news. We'll get to all of it. Dan, if you don't mind, let's start with Jon Jones. After 3 years, he returns to the cage at UFC 285 and dispatches Cyril with a submission in the very first round. He made it look oh so easy yet again. Your overarching reaction to the return of Jon Jones.
Well, honestly, not surprised at how good he looked, but surprised at how quick he made the work. I went all in on my prediction last week. I was very excited about Jones coming back. I expected him to look really, really good. And then he stepped on the scales. And I thought to myself, he looks kind of a bit soft here. I'm a bit concerned because Cyril comes in looking like an athlete, and my first moment of concern was when I saw him on the scales. But then as soon as he stepped in the octagon, there was just this presence, as there always is with Jon Jones, as you know yourself. When he steps into a room, you feel it. And it felt like Cyril was aware that he was in there with greatness, and it just seemed like he crumbled under the pressure a little bit. I mean, to allow Jon Jones to bear over you like that up against the fence, you've got to think a big, strong heavyweight Jon Jones that can wrestle like he can. It was very, very impressive. And, Cyril, we always forget, he's still young in his game. What's that, 13 fights total now? He'll be back. We'll see him with the belt around his waist. But it was Jon Jones's night, and I wasn't surprised.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that Jones won. I was surprised, and very pleasantly so, that we got the version of Jon Jones that we saw early in his career, right? Where he was aggressive and he was hunting for things and he wanted to get out of there quickly. So often we see these champions, these long-standing champions, that have so much to lose once they become kind of the incumbent belt holder, and they fight safe and they fight long and they fight careful, because Jon Jones obviously had the ability to do that against most of his opponents. But the highlight reel leading up to this fight was all finishes that Jon Jones perpetrated against every great opponent at 205, but they were like 5 and 7 and 8-year-old finishes. He hadn't been in there for 3 years. But even the last 2 or 3 years of his title defenses, he'd been, I think, a little more cautious as a champion. He was anything but against Cyril. So not only is Jon Jones back, in my opinion, but Jon Jones is back. He's ready to prove to the heavyweight division that he's got not only the physicality to hang at 265 pounds, or I guess he was, 248, but he's going to finish these guys. He's going to get after it, and he's going to be like the young Jon Jones was, the youngest UFC champion in the history of the organization, where he was just mowing through people and leaving them unconscious and ripping their necks off and dispatching the cold body onto the canvas. That's what made people fall in love with Jon Jones. Not like I can outpoint fight you. That was my big question. Will he be careful because of the power of Cyril and knowing the athleticism and what that guy's capable of? But no, he just went out there and imposed his will. It was really pleasant to see as a fight fan.
Absolutely. And, you go back to when he was in his early 20s and he was, taking out great fighters like Machida. And I mean, what he did to Shogun to take the belt off him was, unparalleled, really. There are very few champions that have taken the belt off the standing champion, in that kind of form. And, and then I kind of feel like we saw him go through the trials and tribulations that a lot of people would go through behind closed doors, because he was a young champion, because he had all this fame and this, this success. And he just kind of looked like he'd, I don't know, lost his focus a little bit at times. And then, I feel like you were right on the money with those last couple of performances. I don't really feel like he was particularly motivated to fight Dominic Reyes, and I think the performance showed that. Same as if you go back to when he fought OSP as a stand-in for Daniel Cormier. He didn't really look like he was really interested in that fight either. And, ultimately, the decision to win a fight is made at the start of training camp. You've got to put the work in on a daily basis. And when he arrived there and Dom Reyes was really giving him problems, it was, it wasn't like it was too much for the Jon Jones at its height, but Jon Jones kind of in a lackluster mood, not really tuned into the fight. He made it look more difficult than it was. And I feel like that was kind of why some people were counting him out against Cyril as a heavyweight. Because as you said, you go back to right early Jon Jones. What was he? He fought Andre Gusmao in his debut, and then he fought Jake O'Brien, dropped him with the spinning elbow, and then guillotined him up against the fence, exactly the same as he did against Cyril. This finishing capability is there with Jon Jones. He just has to be in the right mindset and the right physical preparation to put it on someone. And, you know, with 3 years out, you've got to think that that's going to do a lot for his motivation to step back in there and kind of claim what he feels is his all along and to do it in style. I didn't really see him coming back any other way. He was either going to be spectacular or he was going to be terrible. And
Yeah.
somewhere between the two, I don't think he'd have forgiven himself for it.
So as with any fight, right? There's some good, some bad, some ugly. We talk about the good. Great to see Jon Jones back in form, and in a new weight class where, I mean, his skill set, not just his athleticism, which we talked about so much as a light heavyweight, his skill set is really what separates him apart. He is the greatest fighter of all time, in my opinion, in our sport. Now let's talk about the bad. For me, the bad here is the fact that the UFC fumbled the bag and the opportunity so badly to have Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou squaring. Francis proved to us it's not just about his punching power. It's not just about his athleticism and his raw potential, right? He wrestled his way to a victory against a guy that was dangerous on the feet and showed us that he's improving as a mixed martial artist. And he was the incumbent champion. He was the reigning baddest man on the planet, the heavyweight king. All you had to do was pay him enough, keep him happy, maybe offer some concessions that he was asking for, do something to keep him under contract, and you get the greatest heavyweight fight in the history of our sport, with Jon Jones probably getting a little tune-up, Jon Jones getting ready, showing that he can hang that heavyweight. Now you unify the belts or whatever. Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou, one of the biggest pay-per-views you could ever sell. It's a massive opportunity to kind of reestablish the heavyweight division, all of that stuff, and reestablish Jon Jones and tell you one way or another whether Francis Ngannou is who we think he can be. It's not even a possibility anymore. Dana White, post-fight, says he's never coming back. We're not interested in that anymore. Huge mistake.
Huge mistake. He also did say that women would never fight in the octagon, though, and he did he did go back on that. So we can still hold out a little bit of hope, but it is disappointing. You know, I mean, the UFC should have really, kept Ngannou on the roster, with the belt around his waist. I mean, what a huge fight it would have been to see Jones against Francis Ngannou. And the reality is, as soon as the fight was over, I kept thinking to myself, could Jones just walk into Ngannou's punching range like that, like he did against Cyril? Because Cyril has to accumulate damage on his opponents. You remember what he did to Tai Tuivasa? He beat him up, he cooked him for a while before he was ready for the finish. Like, Francis Ngannou needs one shot, right off the bat, one shot. And I don't know if Jon Jones would be quite as confident walking into his range. It might have been a more calculated Jon Jones in the first couple of rounds, but what a fascinating fight it would have been. It's a shame it's not going to happen. And it's a shame that the blame has been put on Francis Ngannou as well, both by the UFC and by Jon Jones, calling him a choice word, which I think of all words you could choose, that is not the word you would associate with Francis Ngannou. He's not scared of any man, that's for sure. Why would you be if you were Francis? It's just kind of disappointing all round, because that would have been the big fight for Jon Jones at heavyweight, and that is off the table now.
Well, and for Jon Jones to say, oh, Francis is scared of me, it is curious that the timing of your return, Mr. Jones, happened to coincide with the fact that Francis Ngannou was no longer on the UFC roster. That might be a mere coincidence. I don't think Jon Jones is scared of anybody. I really do believe he is the greatest of all time. But you don't get to sit around and say, no, it was just convenient timing that the 3 years I was out of the sport is when Francis was really reigning as the champion. If you wanted to make that fight happen, you could have made that fight happen when Francis had no choice but to fight you. In any case, good, bad, ugly. Just briefly, the ugly thing here, right? There's always complications when you're talking about greatness. This happens in art. This happens in music. This happens in sports. Jon Jones has been a very complicated personality in our sport, right? And we saw in his post-fight speech right there, the family's with him, his fiance's with him. Domestic violence and mixed martial arts, in my opinion, should not mix, cannot mix. We need to see Jon Jones, I don't want to say apologetic, but we need to see Jon Jones living above reproach as the champion. If he's going to be a heavyweight king and he's going to eventually go back down to 205 and try to steal that belt back and be a two-division titleist, I need to see Jon Jones not be a Boy Scout, but not creating headlines about cocaine usage and hit and runs and domestic violence especially. That's the ugly side of the greatness that's been on display for Jon Jones. if we're talking about legacy, and that seems very important to him, all that stuff has to go away.
Do you think there's anything he can do to kind of draw a line under that, though? Because I feel like it's going to follow him regardless. Like, people have made their opinion up about him, as have they about Greg Hardy. And, you know, of course, the UFC president is not setting a great example himself. Like, I don't know what he could do to kind of draw a line under that and move along. I mean, like, his post-fight interviews, it doesn't seem like him to me. I still think he's quite cold-blooded, and I don't know as he's ever going to escape the fact that people feel like there's a mask that he's keeping up. But it certainly feels like a mask to me. I mean, I've been calling it his church voice, you know. Oh, I'm so proud of you, Anthony Smith. I'm so proud of you. You've earned my respect, Dom Reyes. I just don't buy it. Like, you know, it's just not Jon Jones, right? And I don't know as he can shake that bad boy persona, much like, you know, as nice and as smiley as Mike Tyson is now. You still look in his eyes and he looks like a Siberian tiger. I don't know. I just feel like some people, when they have the capability of reaching that height in a combat sport, there has to be something a little bit a bit of edge to them that they might not be able to get away from. And I mean, Conor McGregor's showing the same thing. Sure. I don't know as Jon Jones can get away from that.
And you're probably right. You might be right. I mean, I'm thinking about for my own self. Will I ever regard Jon Jones the way that I regard GSP as a great representative and champion of the sport? Probably not, right? But if he's going to be around and if he's going to be competing, he's going to be knocking off these heavyweights. Just don't create any more of those new negative headlines. At the very least, right? Stay out of your own way, Jon Jones, because you're back. And right at the end of his speech, he did he bleated like the goat that we all know he is. Stay away from the bad headlines. That's all I'm asking.
For sure. Absolutely. And you know, most likely he's going to get Stipe next, who's one of the nicest guys. You know, he's a firefighter and a family guy. And, you know, he's basically all the things that we wish Jon Jones was as a martial artist, alongside being, you know, a killer in the octagon. But then, you know, is Stipe going to be able to put a beating on Jon Jones, or is Jon Jones just head and shoulders above the rest of the division? That's the question.
I looked at the rankings, and I did not see anybody, not one name in that top 15 that I'm like, that guy will beat Jon Jones. All due respect to Stipe, who I admire, and I think as far as accomplishments in the heavyweight division, he stands alone right now. But I think Jon Jones probably dispatches him. Although 253-pound Stipe will be much more interesting than like the 232-pound Stipe we just saw last time out. But I digress. We don't need to get into that matchup just yet. Sean O'Connell, Dan Hardy, DAZN MMA, for the best on the UFC, the best on the PFL, the best on the sport of mixed martial arts. Keep it right here.